Okay, so before we move on to reinforcement and punishment, I want to give you a few more examples about our contingencies. So if we're looking at the ABCs of behavior. So let's look at the first example. And the main thing about these examples that I want you to think about is looking at whose behavior we're examining and identifying first, and then looking at the variables surrounding that. So in a lot of examples, there might be two people behaving, like the mom and a child. So for the purposes of these examples, we're going to focus on the child's behavior and kind of work backwards. So a child's at the grocery store with their parent and they see candy on the shelf. They say, "Mom, can I have some candy?" Their mom says yes and buys them candy. So the behavior is of the child asking for candy. So saying, "Mom, can I have candy?" That's the behavior. The antecedent is the child seeing the candy on the shelf at the grocery store. And the consequence is getting candy. So the mom says yes and buys them candy. So that's one example of our ABC contingencies. So let's look at another example. So the scenario is a child is at the grocery store with their parent. They see candy on the shelf. Their mom usually says no when they ask for candy, so they immediately start crying and whining. Their mom says, "Fine, here," and buys them candy. Sure, some of you can relate to this example because when your child is screaming at the grocery store, it's not the best scene. So the behavior, we'll start there. We're looking at the child's behavior. So the child's behavior is whining and crying. The antecedent is the same as the previous example, seeing candy on the shelf. The consequence is getting candy. So the behavior is different in this example, but the consequences and the antecedents are the same. Okay, in our last example, I'll go through the scenario. So in this one, the antecedent and the behavior are the same. So a child is at the grocery store with their parent. They see candy on the shelf. Their mom usually says no when they ask for candy, so they immediately start crying and whining. The mom says, "You're behaving badly. We are leaving the store." And the child doesn't get candy. So the behavior, we'll start there again, is whining and crying because we're looking at the child's behavior. And the antecedent is the same because it's the child seeing the candy on the shelf. And then the consequence is the child gets reprimanded, "You're behaving very badly," and they leave the store and don't get the candy. So this is another example of the ABC continuum. So let's talk about a little bit of homework for you next. So looking at behavior through this ABC continuum and contingency can be extremely helpful when you're trying to figure out why certain behaviors are happening. So we can look at changing then the consequences and the antecedents in order to shift behavior. So it's really important that we kind of identify what are the A's, the antecedents, and what are the C's, the consequences surrounding a behavior. And then we can look at shifting those and making some changes. So within this lesson, we've included a downloadable ABC tracking sheet that you'll find in this section. And you can use this to help you look at the ABCs when different behaviors are occurring. I would highly recommend starting with your own behavior first and looking at the antecedents and consequences that are connected to your own behaviors. And then start looking at your child's or your students or your husband's. For example, some of the, this is one of the examples that I think is pretty obvious. So, and something that you probably do every day is turning your alarm off in the morning. So your antecedent would be the sound of the alarm. Your behavior might be turning off the alarm or pressing the snooze button, which is what I do most mornings. The consequence is the sound of the alarm stopping. So this is a really great, easy example of something that happens every day, and the antecedents and the consequences are what shapes your response. So I think this is a really great activity. It's kind of fun little homework for you. So please check out the sheet. Download it and start filling it out so you can get an idea of how your behavior is shaped and changed on a daily basis.